Someone grabbed the child. The shout echoed across the upper transit deck, just as the transport skimmer smashed into the gravity barrier with a deafening crack of collapsing energy. A wave of blue sparks rippled through the air like lightning trapped in glass, and the hovering vehicle spun violently before slamming against the station's emergency rails. For a moment, the entire platform froze, dozens of alien merchants, diplomats, and travelers staring in stunned silence at the burning craft suspended halfway over the edge of the city. Then the alarms began. Ellistra's trade capital was built like a crown of floating platforms above a violet ocean, its sky filled with sleek starships gliding between towers of living crystal. Normally, the transit district thrummed with elegant alien voices and glowing market lights. Now the air was filled with smoke and panic as people scattered away from the damaged skimmer. "Contain the power core," someone shouted. "Royal security is inbound." Several tall figures with luminous pale skin pushed through the crowd. Ellistran guards wearing sleek silver armor that seemed grown rather than manufactured. Their long ears curved slightly backward, and their eyes shone faintly with violet light as they studied the wreckage. One of them raised a scanning device. "Energy instability rising," he said urgently. "The skimmer will detonate in less than 2 minutes." The crowd murmured nervously. Inside the shattered cockpit, something moved, a small figure, a child. "She's still inside," another guard said. For a brief moment, the platform fell into a tense, terrible silence. Everyone could see the girl now through the fractured glass, her silver hair glowing faintly in the firelight, her luminous violet eyes wide with fear. She looked barely 10 years old by human standards, clutching the damaged console while flames crept slowly along the interior walls. The nearest guard took a step forward, then stopped. The power core beneath the skimmer crackled violently, releasing another burst of energy that forced him back. "Too unstable," he muttered. Another guard looked at him sharply. "We cannot wait. If the core ruptures while we are inside, we will all die." Several bystanders exchanged anxious glances. Among them stood a human. Elias had been halfway through replacing a faulty gravline panel when the crash happened. His tool kit still hung from his shoulder, and grease from the station's maintenance shafts stained the sleeves of his gray work jacket. He stared at the burning skimmer, then at the guards, then back at the child. One of the Ellistran merchants beside him whispered quietly to another alien, their voices low but not quite quiet enough. "Of course it happens when humans are around. Humans attract disaster." Elias sighed. He had heard variations of that sentence almost every day since he arrived on Ellistra. Humans were tolerated here, technically welcomed as neutral workers and traders, but they were still outsiders, unpredictable, a little too loud, a little too reckless. One of the guards activated his communicator. "Royal Command," he said urgently, "the princess's escort vehicle has been compromised." The word hit Elias immediately. "Princess." Several nearby aliens gasped softly. "The Queen's daughter," someone whispered. The guard nodded grimly. Inside the wreckage, the girl pressed against the cracked glass. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching, waiting. Elias shifted his weight. The guards were arguing now. "If we stabilize the core, there is no time. We must attempt extraction and trigger the detonation ourselves." Elias rubbed the back of his neck. "Hey," he said. None of the guards responded. "Hey," he repeated a little louder. One of the Ellistrans turned toward him, clearly irritated. "This is a restricted emergency." "How long until that thing explodes?" Elias asked. The guard blinked at him. "Approximately 90 seconds. Elias looked at the skimmer again. The flames had spread further along the cockpit frame. The child inside was coughing now. "Right," Elias muttered. He set down his tool kit. Several nearby aliens watched him with mild confusion. "Human," one merchant said cautiously, "what are you doing?" Elias rolled up his sleeves, trying something irresponsible. Before anyone could react, he sprinted toward the wreckage. "Stop!" one of the guards shouted. Elias ignored him. The heat hit him immediately as he climbed onto the damaged hull. The metal surface trembled beneath his boots while sparks erupted from the cracked power lines. Inside the cockpit, the girl stared at him in shock. He pressed his hand against the fractured glass. "Hey," he said through the smoke, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "You doing okay in there?" She blinked. "You are human," she said, her voice small but steady. "Last time I checked." The glass between them splintered further as the power core below screamed with rising energy. Elias glanced at it. "All right," he muttered. "We're on a bit of a timer." The child looked behind him at the crowd. The guards will come. Elias gave a crooked smile. They're busy arguing. He pulled a compact plasma cutter from his belt, standard maintenance equipment. The girl's glowing eyes widened. You cannot cut that panel, she said quickly. The stabilizers will. Probably explode, Elias agreed. She stared at him. Then why? Because, Elias said, already slicing into the warped metal frame. If we wait any longer, you explode anyway. The cutter screamed through the hull. Behind him, the Elistran guards shouted in alarm. What is the human doing? He is breaching the cockpit. He will trigger the core. Elias ignored all of it. The panel finally tore loose with a sharp metallic crack. Smoke rushed out of the opening. Elias reached inside and extended his hand. Hi, he said. Name's Elias. The girl hesitated, then she grabbed his hand. Her skin was cool and faintly luminous against his. The moment he pulled her out of the wreckage, the skimmer's core released a violent surge of light. Run! Someone screamed. Elias didn't need to be told twice. He jumped from the hull, clutching the girl against his chest as he sprinted across the platform. Behind them, the skimmer exploded. A blast of blue energy roared into the sky, sending a shockwave rippling across the platform. Elias dove behind a cargo barrier just as the fireball erupted overhead. For several seconds there was nothing but ringing silence. Then slowly, he lifted his head. The girl was still clinging to him. Her luminous violet eyes blinked in disbelief. You, she whispered. Elias coughed slightly, brushing ash off his jacket. Yep, he said. Around them, dozens of Elistran citizens stared in stunned silence. The guards rushed forward, weapons lowered but expressions filled with shock. One of them scanned the girl quickly, then his posture snapped upright. The princess is unharmed. The platform erupted into relieved murmurs. Elias blinked. Princess. He repeated. The child looked up at him with a small, grateful smile. Yes. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck. The Elistran guards froze. Across the entire transit deck, alien merchants, diplomats, and officers stared at the human maintenance worker holding the daughter of their queen. And none of them quite knew what to say. You are holding the heir to the Elistran throne. Elias looked down at the small girl, still wrapped around his neck. Then he looked back up at the guard who had just said that, with the tone of someone announcing a catastrophic cosmic event. Right, Elias said slowly. The princess tightened her grip slightly. You saved me, she said quietly. One of the guards stepped forward immediately, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Your Highness, he said carefully, you must come with us. The girl did not move. Her luminous violet eyes remained fixed on Elias as if she were trying to memorize his face. Elias cleared his throat awkwardly. Up, princess. He said gently, yes. You might want to let go before your security team arrests me for kidnapping. Several Elistran guards stiffened. The princess blinked. Oh. She released him immediately and stepped back, smoothing the front of her silver ceremonial tunic as if she had suddenly remembered she was supposed to behave like royalty. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Good, he said, because I feel like I've already caused enough problems today. Behind them, the transit platform had turned into a scene of organized chaos. Emergency drones hovered through the air scanning debris while repair crews rushed toward the destroyed skimmer. Alien civilians stood at a distance, whispering to one another while glancing repeatedly at the human who had just jumped into an exploding royal transport. A tall Elistran officer approached Elias slowly. Up close, his species, elegant features were even more striking. Smooth, luminous skin, long ears curving slightly backward, and silver eyes that glowed faintly with analytical intensity. You are the one who entered the wreckage, the officer said. Elias nodded. That would be me. You did so despite the imminent detonation of the skimmer's core. Yeah, that part was less ideal. The officer studied him. You understood the risk. Pretty clearly. And yet you proceeded. Elias shrugged. Well, someone had to. The officer glanced briefly toward the princess, who now stood beside two guards but continued watching Elias with unmistakable fascination. You acted without hesitation, the officer said. Elias tilted his head. Is that unusual? For most species, the officer replied, yes. A nearby merchant muttered quietly to another alien. Humans do strange things. Elias sighed. Hey, I can hear you. The princess suddenly stepped forward again. His name is Elias, she announced. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Elias blinked. Well, now everyone knows. One of the younger guards crouched slightly to speak with her. Your Highness, the Queen will wish to see you immediately. The girl nodded, yes. Then she turned back to Elias. You will come too. Elias pointed at himself. Me. Yes, why? Because my mother must thank you. Elias shifted uncomfortably. That sounds official. It is. He looked at the surrounding guards, hoping someone might rescue him from the situation. None of them did. In fact, several of them were now staring at him with a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration. One of them finally spoke. You understand, the guard said carefully, that you have just saved the life of the royal heir to the Elistran Empire. Elias rubbed his face. Yeah, that part is starting to sink in. Another guard added quietly, the Queen will insist on rewarding you. Elias groaned softly. That sounds expensive. The princess tilted her head. Expensive. Royal rewards usually come with complicated expectations. The guards exchanged glances again. He is suspicious of being rewarded. One murmured. Elias pointed at him. See, that reaction right there is exactly what I mean. A faint smile tugged at the princess's lips. You are very strange, she said. Humans get that a lot. Before the conversation could continue, a sleek black transport descended from above the platform. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, marked with the sigil of the Elistran royal house. The crowd went silent. Royal transport. The side of the craft opened, revealing a softly glowing interior. The tall officer gestured toward it. Your Highness. The princess nodded and began walking toward the ship. Halfway there she turned back. Elias was still standing near the cargo barrier. You are coming, she said again. Elias sighed. Do I have a choice? No. That's what I was afraid of. He picked up his abandoned toolkit and followed the guards toward the transport. As they boarded, several Elistran officers continued whispering to one another. That human entered a critical detonation zone and survived. He extracted the princess in under 40 seconds. That is not typical civilian behavior. Another officer added quietly. His movements were precise. Inside the transport, Elias buckled into the nearest seat. The princess sat across from him, watching with open curiosity. You fix machines? She asked. Mostly. Why? Because they break. She considered that answer carefully. That is a very human explanation. Elias grinned. We're efficient like that. The transport lifted smoothly from the platform, rising above the towering city. Through the wide viewing window, the royal capital of Elistra stretched across the horizon. Crystal towers, floating gardens, and glowing bridges spanning violet seas. The princess leaned closer to the window. My mother will be very grateful, she said. Elias stared out at the massive palace complex in the distance. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I'm worried about. One of the royal officers glanced toward him. You fear meeting the queen. Elias scratched his cheek. Let's just say I wasn't planning on being summoned to an alien palace today. The princess smiled faintly. I was not planning on almost exploding either. Elias nodded. Fair point. The transport glided toward the palace towers, sunlight reflecting off their crystalline surfaces. As it approached the landing platform, the tall officer studying Elias finally spoke again. There is something I do not understand. Elias looked at him. What's that? You entered a burning royal vehicle, the officer said, without hesitation, without reward, without knowing who the child was. Elias shrugged. She needed help. The officer's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. That is not sufficient motivation for most beings. Elias leaned back in his seat. Maybe most beings overthink things. The officer watched him for several seconds. Then he said quietly, or perhaps human, you are not as ordinary as you appear. Elias smiled faintly. Trust me, he said. I fix broken gravity panels for a living. Outside the window, the massive royal palace of Elistra rose closer and closer, and somewhere inside those crystalline towers, an alien queen was already waiting to meet the human who had carried her daughter out of an explosion. You risked your life for my daughter. The voice filled the vast chamber with calm authority, soft yet powerful enough that every person in the room instinctively fell silent. Elias looked up. The throne hall of Elistra was far larger than he had expected. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that seemed to dissolve into starlight, and flowing streams of glowing energy ran through the floor like living rivers. Alien nobles lined both sides of the chamber, their luminous skin reflecting the violet light of the palace. At the far end stood the queen. She was taller than most Ellistrands, her posture graceful and regal, with silver-white hair flowing down her back like liquid light. Her eyes glowed brighter than any he had seen before, deep violet, ancient, and watchful. Beside her stood the princess. The moment she saw Ilias enter, she ran down the steps of the throne platform. "Mother, this is him." Several nobles gasped quietly at the informality, but the queen only watched. The princess stopped beside Ilias and proudly pointed up at him. "He pulled me out of the fire," she said. Ilias gave an awkward half-wave to the most powerful ruler on the planet. "Hello." A ripple of quiet murmurs spread across the court. One of the nobles whispered, "He greets the queen as if she were a neighbor." The queen raised a hand and the room fell silent again. She descended the steps slowly until she stood only a few feet away from Ilias. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, not threatening, but powerful in the way ancient stars must feel to those who orbit them. "You knew the vehicle was going to explode," she said. Ilias nodded, more or less. "You knew the child inside was Ellistran." "Yeah, you did not know she was my daughter." "Nope." The queen studied his face for a long moment. "Yet you enter the wreckage." Ilias shrugged slightly. She looked scared. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. The queen tilted her head just slightly. "You speak as though the decision required no thought." Ilias scratched the back of his neck. Thinking felt like a waste of time at that moment. The princess looked up at him proudly. He ran in before anyone else moved. A murmur swept across the court again. One of the elder nobles spoke quietly. Many guards hesitated because of the unstable core. Another added, the human did not. The queen's gaze softened just slightly. "My daughter tells me you did not ask for reward." Ilias blinked. "I did." "You did not request payment, position, or influence." "Oh," he said, "right." The queen folded her hands together. "That is unusual." Ilias smiled faintly. "Well, I wasn't saving her for a reward." The princess tugged gently at his sleeve. "He also made soup," she added. Ilias coughed. "That part was unrelated." For the first time, a faint smile touched the queen's lips. Then her expression grew serious again. "There are many within this empire," she said slowly, "who distrust humans." Several nobles stiffened. They see humanity as unpredictable, reckless, difficult to understand. Ilias raised a finger slightly. "To be fair, that's not completely inaccurate." A few nobles looked horrified. The princess giggled. The queen continued watching him carefully. "But today," she said, "a human placed the life of an Ellistran child above his own safety." She turned slightly toward the court. "Such actions carry meaning." One of the high ministers stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we must also consider the political consequences. Rewarding a human so publicly may." The queen raised her hand again. The minister fell silent. "I have considered it." She turned back toward Ilias. "There is a gift in Ellistran tradition," she said, "reserved only for those who earn the deepest trust of the royal family." Two attendants approached, carrying a small pedestal. Resting on it was a crystalline object the size of a human heart. It glowed softly with shifting colors, violet, silver, and gold swirling within its facets like captured starlight. Ilias leaned forward slightly. "That's very shiny." One of the nobles whispered reverently, "The heart of a cord." Another added in disbelief, "It has not been given in centuries." The queen lifted the artifact carefully. "This relic was created by the first rulers of Ellistra," she said. "It bonds only with those it recognizes as protectors of the empire." She stepped closer to Ilias. "And today it belongs to you." The room fell into stunned silence. Ilias stared at the glowing crystal. He said carefully, "Are you sure?" The princess nodded enthusiastically. "Yes." The queen extended the relic toward him. Ilias hesitated only a moment before taking it. The instant his fingers touched the crystal, the chamber exploded with light. Energy surged outward in a silent wave, illuminating every pillar in the palace. The artifact in Ilias' hands began glowing brighter and brighter, its inner patterns shifting rapidly. Several nobles gasped, "That should not be possible. The relic has not awakened like that in generations." The queen's eyes widened slightly. Ilias looked down at the artifact. "Did I break it?" The crystal suddenly projected a holographic sphere above his hands. Star systems, fleet formations, ancient Ellistran command networks. The artifact was activating. A royal advisor stepped forward in shock. "Your Majesty, the heart is recognizing him." "Recognizing him as what?" Another asked. The hologram shifted again. A symbol appeared, an ancient Elistran crest used only by the Empire's legendary protectors. The princess looked up at Elias with shining eyes. It chose you. Elias blinked. I was hoping it chose someone else. The queen studied the glowing relic carefully. Fascinating, she murmured. One of the nobles spoke nervously. The artifact responds only to those who embody the Empire's founding oath. Another whispered, courage without expectation of reward. The queen looked at Elias again. You did not seek influence, she said quietly. You did not seek recognition. Elias shrugged. I just didn't want a kid to explode. The princess smiled brightly. You see, she told the court, I told you he was brave. The queen slowly placed a hand over the glowing artifact. Then she looked directly at Elias. It seems, she said softly, that your simple act of courage has done more than save my daughter. She gestured toward the holographic star maps. You have awakened a relic capable of commanding the Empire's oldest defense networks. Elias stared at the projection. So that's bad. The queen smiled gently. No. It means the Empire now has a protector it did not expect. The princess grabbed Elias' arm happily. You are staying here now. Elias laughed nervously. I was supposed to go back to fixing gravity panels tomorrow. Several nobles chuckled quietly. The queen turned back toward the court. Let it be known across Elistra, she declared, her voice echoing through the vast chamber, that on this day a human proved that courage belongs to no single species. The nobles bowed their heads. Elias stood there holding the glowing relic, still looking mildly confused about how his day had turned into this. The princess tugged his sleeve again. Do you still fix machines? She asked. Usually. She pointed at the floating holographic fleet. Good. Elias followed her gaze. Hundreds of ancient Elistran ships shimmered within the projection. He sighed. Those look expensive to repair. The princess laughed. And across the great crystal hall, the alien empire watched with curiosity, admiration, and growing respect, as the human who once repaired broken panels quietly became part of their future.